Hi artists! Today I've put together some slides and a chat that are going to help you select exactly which tubes of paint you want to select from out of your stash or add to your stash if you are interested in painting with that well-loved elemental color palette, the ideal starter palette in so many ways, a limited primary red, yellow, blue approach to color. This is an exceptionally useful and streamlined approach to painting, but it does invite a few questions. Exactly which red, which yellow, and which blue will be best suited to you, your style of painting, your personal circumstances, and your budget. Together, we'll take an in-depth peek at some of my preferred ways to solve the problem of finding the ideal red, yellow, and blue. Keep in mind, the information in this video is geared towards opaque painting. Watercolor painting has a whole different set of circumstances, and the solutions to the problem of primary palette in watercolor can be quite different to the best solutions for opaque painting. So our focus today is on the opaque, acrylic, oil, and gouache. So let's say that you've decided to use a red, yellow, blue limited palette strategy. You want to paint with a primary yellow, a primary red, a primary blue, and white, and the possible addition of a burnt sienna, burnt umber, or black. So this is a very comfortable, budget-friendly, and very expansive palette to start painting with. The question of what red, what yellow, what blue is one that we can take a closer look at. And by the time we're done covering this list, all of you should be able to find some options that will fit your budget and your needs and start to feel some excitement about using some paint that you know will do the job that you need it to do. So for primary yellow, we have a lot of options. Our first option is, for many people, what they consider the best. This is cadmium yellow. You can use lemon or light, and you could also use medium, though this starts to get into the territory of orange. So I like light or lemon. When you look at your tube of paint, you're looking for the fine print somewhere that says PY35. This is how you know you have a cadmium-based yellow paint. This information can also sometimes be found in the fine print of your online retailer, so do some clicking around to make sure that your paint, if you're looking to buy a cadmium yellow, contains cadmium yellow PY35. The downside to this paint is its cost and the fact that it is toxic, so we must dispose of this much more carefully than we would some of our other options. The upside to this color is that it is proven over many, many years, hundreds of years, to be stable, light fast, and consistent. Another option that we have is bismuth or bismuth vanadate yellow. We're looking for the fine print pigment code of PY184. This paint is beautiful, intense, and gives us lots of bright color. The disadvantages to using bismuth yellow is that this paint has mild toxicity. It is not nearly as toxic as cadmium, but again, we must be careful of how we dispose of the color. And another advantage/disadvantage is that I have found the price points for this pigment to vary all over the place. So depending on the manufacturer, this pigment can be a more expensive alternative or a less expensive alternative to cadmium. It has this underlying green tendency, so this can also be something that may make bismuth less than an ideal choice for us, depending on what we like to do with our yellow color. My personal favorite option, second to an actual cadmium, is to use benzimidazolone yellow. This pigment code is PY151. And this color really gives us everything that we need, just about. It is a very balanced, clean, bright, and intense yellow. It does the job. It will make beautiful oranges and beautiful greens alike. The only downside to this color that I can think of is that it just doesn't quite pack as much punch as an actual cadmium. So the price point is significantly lower. This allows us to get painting and get into our painting without having to do this sort of large outlay of cash, but keep in mind that your benzimidazolone yellow will not go as far as your tube of cadmium yellow. Another slight disadvantage, in addition to price, is that while our cadmiums are very opaque and covering, our benzimidazolone yellows are much more transparent. This is neither good nor bad, just a fact to keep in mind when we paint, and it's something that we can overcome pretty easily by creating just the slightest amount of a tint with the addition of a little bit of titanium white. Overall, the benzimidazolone pigments are a bright, intense, beautiful, and less toxic, less expensive alternative that provide an exceptionally clean yellow color. So here we come to Hansa Yellow Light, PY3. This is an incredibly popular pigment. It is almost always the primary yellow of the starter set. It is a great color, super clean, beautiful and intense, and it can be formulated into an unbelievably opaque and beautiful rival to cadmium lemons. What are the problems with Hansa Yellow Light? It's tempting to say, well, this pigment is not light fast. But I think that we can modify this statement a bit to say that you kind of get what you pay for. I use Hansa Yellow Light PY3 perfectly happily, but certain manufacturers really load up the pigment and put in additives that keep this color much more light fast and much less prone to fading. Some of the cheaper usages of this color put in certain additives that will combine with it to discolor, and it can be prone to fading in certain less expensive formulations. So you get what you pay for with this color. However, it is very inexpensive, so it will be one of the less expensive pigments within premium ranges like Golden, like Daniel Smith. So when I do choose to use a PY3, personally, I opt for the good stuff, and I still don't wind up paying too much for a great, clean primary yellow. Our last option has a bit more of a yellow or golden character. So if the greenish characteristic of a bismuth yellow or a Hansa yellow gets on your nerves, an arylide yellow PY174 is a good option. Arylide colors are less light fast than the other options on this list, so this is something you will need to think about if you are painting work for sale or if you are including an arylide in a large outdoor mural or a large indoor interior piece that might get a lot of sunlight. Other than this, an arylide gives us a slightly more orange-leaning but beautiful, clean, and fundamentally primary yellow. I would say that an arylide yellow is a good analog for a cadmium yellow light versus a cadmium lemon. The pigment code for the arylide that tends to be the most stable, light fast, and consistent in its group is PY174. Our next task is to fill the red slot on our red, yellow, blue color plan. And again, we have lots of different options that can do this job. each with some distinct advantages and disadvantages. As before, our first really solid, really color-rich and beautiful option is to use cadmium-based reds. Cadmium red medium or cadmium red light are my recommendations. The pigment code for these colors is PR108. As before, the disadvantages to using these cadmium-based colors are those of toxicity and cost prohibitiveness. They can be quite expensive. An excellent replacement for these colors, which takes care of the problem of toxicity and puts the price of the pigment somewhere in the middle of the range rather than towards the top, is to use a pyrrole red. The pigment code for pyrrole red is PR254, and I personally absolutely adore this very balanced, very beautiful red color, and it gives us lots and lots of color intensity. It has a very cadmium-like behavior, and it does cost quite a bit less while being less of a problem to clean up environmentally. A more common and low-cost approach to giving you a primary red in those mixing sets and starter sets is typically to use a naphthol red. These come in a pretty wide assortment of versions, and some of these versions are highly unstable and really not very desirable. As with our Hansa yellows, if you spring for a slightly better quality of paint, you are liable to get a paint that is just about as light fast as a pyrrole for quite a bit less in terms of cash outlay. I'm particularly fond of how Golden, Liquitex, and M. Graham handle this pigment. The pigment is naphthol red and its code is PR170. So all of the colors that we've looked at so far are very strong, very clean, beautiful reds. They are all reasonably light fast to extremely light fast, so we won't have problems with fading or degradation if we're careful about which naphthols we choose. And all of these colors have what's known as a yellow bias. These would rather create clean and clear oranges versus clean and clear purples. So while still using red, yellow, and blue as our primary colors, I think there is a quinacridone pigment that still fits into the slot of red. So this pigment is quinacridone red. Look for the pigment code of PR209. This color can be a little harder to track down than some other more magenta quinacridone colors. But what this color is a very clear and clean blue-leaning red that I think still fits the slot of a red. And this color has an underlying prettiness to it. It's very seductively rosy and pretty and glowing. But it's still a red color. I don't think that I would characterize this as a pink. This gives us a lot of mixing versatility that the other reds on my list do not give us, but it comes at a cost. This is a much lower tinting strength color, so in essence, in mixes, it is pretty weak and easily overpowered. This weakness is also, I think, the source of its subtlety, its prettiness, and its overall delicate characteristic. So it is possible to use PR209 as your primary red. Just understand that it comes at a bit of a trade-off. It is not the most expensive pigment, but certainly not the cheapest, and you may find yourself going through a lot of it relative to the blue and the yellow on your palette. A more balanced three-color palette would involve choosing one of the other mixtures at the expense of really intense purple colors. Last is our primary blue consideration, and I think that we have three good options, but one of our options is clearly superior to the others in every way. The best option for filling the blue slot of a red, yellow, blue limited color primary based palette is without a doubt, in my mind, ultramarine blue. Pigment code is PB29. This color is inexpensive, often the least expensive chromatic color in any given paint range. This color is easily available to the point of being ubiquitous. It is almost always available within mixing sets and starter sets. This color is almost unmatched in its versatility. It plays well with others. It creates surprising and extensive possibilities, even within a limited palette. It is one of those colors that I find it very hard to leave out of any given painting entirely. There's really no good reason not to have an ultramarine blue at your disposal when you paint, whether you're painting with opaque or transparent media. Now, the only downside that I can think of to this color is that it does weaken up in tints pretty rapidly. When we add white, this color dulls down and becomes a bit chalky kind of quickly. So this is something that we need to learn to manage and deal with in different ways. It presents a little bit of a problem. If that chalky characteristic and that sort of quick tendency to dull with the addition of white is something that really bothers you, then I think it's okay to substitute a phthalo blue red shade for your ultramarine blue. Your paintings will have an amped up and somewhat more modern feel to them if you make this substitution, and this phthalo blue is still very, very versatile. The pigment code for phthalo blue red shade is PB15:1. There is a final option, which is often assigned this third slot on the primary palette in traditional painting, but in this case, the toxic, expensive, and intense color is not necessarily my first-line choice, or I think the best option. This would be cobalt blue. The pigment code is PB28. Now, cobalt blue on its own is an absolutely beautiful color, and it behaves so beautifully when you add white. The tints that you get from cobalt blue have a lot more subtlety and a lot more depth than the ones that you might get from your ultramarine. However, the problem with cobalt blue is that we can take it right out of the tube, and we can get a very bright blue. We can get a gorgeous electric radiant blue right out of the tube, and it's very opaque and it has a lot of covering power, but it never really gets dark enough. Ultramarine blue is transparent and dark, almost a black value right out of the tube, and this allows us to make some truly dark neutral shadow colors. If we switch out our ultramarine blue in favor of cobalt blue, we will never get these truly deep, dark, high contrast, near black darks that we can with ultramarine. And for really full spectrum paintings, for really effective paintings, it is so incredibly helpful to have some of these true shadow colors and to not necessarily just pull them out of a tube of black. So in this case, the non-toxic, extremely inexpensive, easily obtainable, right there in your starter set version of blue, I think is far and away the best choice of blue if you want to take on a red, yellow, blue limited palette approach. Of course, whatever colors you choose from these lists, you will also need plenty of white. If you are painting in oil, this must not be zinc white, and if you are painting in acrylic and in gouache, zinc white is totally fine. There are long-term stability issues with zinc white in oil. Titanium white is a flexible, wonderful, and stable alternative. I hope that this has helped you understand what some of your options are and gotten you excited about identifying some that might be appropriate for you. What really helps each of us is to clarify and understand, identify what our priorities are. For some of us, having a non-toxic studio environment is paramount. For others, we might be on a budget. And for others, we might need to offer our clients something that has stood the test of time already and something we know is going to hold up. None of these priorities are bad or good. They are simply different approaches that we can take when we create our work. Thank you so much for hanging out until the end of this video. I hope that it has offered you something useful, and I'll see you next time.